It's been 20 years since I worked as a counselor at Camp Valleyway. 20 years that I've tried to forget what I've seen, lying to myself and others about what I know happened. And for many of those years, I succeeded in fooling myself, pushing the dark thoughts into a hidden place in my mind. But after reading the newspaper today, I can lie no longer. Let me begin my story. I started work when I was 15, spending my summers away at Camp Valleyway. The camp was nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians, cupped in a valley between two mountains with a natural lake at the center. Its waters stained murky with southern clay. I worked as a swim instructor, and each week a new set of campers traveled from across the state to experience the outdoors. I still remember the exact day it happened. Tuesday, 5th week of camp, the hottest day of that summer and just before the 4th of July. The week was known as Rich Week to the counselors, since many of the wealthier parents took off for the holiday and left their children behind. It came right after the Orphan Week, which was when the Clarkstown Orphanage, largest in the state, traveled to camp free of charge because the camp was government-owned. Yearly, the local residents came by at the end of the week, and children were often adopted. Just last week, a girl in my class had found a new home with some farmers a few miles out, and I remember seeing Ellie wave from the cab of a pickup truck as she started her new life in the country. As a swim instructor, in my off time I helped the sail instructors patch sails under the water sports canopy. Logan, the head of water sports and about 5 years older than me, sat across from the picnic tables, his small eyes looking over the lake. Logan kept his hair in a tight buzz cut, revealing a scar around the back of his head, and when he spoke, it was in a deep drawl. "Mike, you watch what you're doing," he growled, noticing I had skipped a stitch. "I only got 2 eyes, and there's too much going on for me to watch everyone today." "Got it," I said, and I put my head down. Logan kept a tight watch on his crew, but now his focus was on the lake. Ed and Ted, 2 twin counselors with one brain between them, were teaching a beginner's swimming course. Ed and Ted always made Logan very uneasy, and had earned a spot of first and second on his mental list of instructors who were most likely to screw up next. So when Ed, the smarter of the two, came sprinting up from the lakeside so fast his long legs spewed dirt exhaust behind him, Logan was ready. Ed opened his mouth, words wheezing in between each intake breath, and his wet hair plastered over one eye. We're missing one camper. We can't find him in the water. Friends don't know where he is." Without hesitation, Logan's whistle shrieked throughout the campground, startling campers and counselors alike. "Out of the water! Get out of the water! All lifeguards to the dock!" he shouted, his deep chest working like a bellow as adrenaline shot through me and we ran to the water. As a lifeguard, it was our responsibility to search for the body, and 15 of us lined up in one end of the swimming section. At Logan's call, we dove, myself to the deep end at 14 feet, and we spread across the bottom. The water filtered sunlight and heat, so the bottom was cold and dark, with underwater plants that gripped against my calves and pulled me back as I swam. After 3 strokes, I returned to the surface, and Logan sent us back down again to search, hoping to still find a warm form. I was the one who found the body. Its hand brushed against my face, a pale palm that was all too white. I saw the face next, too dark to recognize, but a girl, with long hair that fanned around her like she was under static electricity. I gasped, involuntarily drawing in water to my lungs, gripped her torso, and began swimming to the surface. She felt swollen, her arms too big, and her temperature a cold I will never forget. Halfway to the surface, I felt her leg catch on something, and she was pulled back down out of my grip. I turned, watching her open eyes on mine as she descended. But my lungs screamed, and I knew I needed air, or I would join her down below for much longer than I intended. Breaking the surface, I screamed that I found her, and I dove back down, my hands sweeping through the muddy bottom. But I found nothing but muck and empty water, even as the other lifeguards joined. Now 5 minutes later, and Logan's whistle ran out again, calling us to the dock. "The camper's been found," he announced, "in a restroom by his site. Now Ed and Ted must have let him slip past them, and both of them will spend this night scrubbing the dock with your own toothbrushes." He paused, and I felt the other lifeguard's gaze fall on me. "Y'all free to go, except for Mike. I want a word with you." The others trudged away, looking back at us over their shoulder. Logan focused on me, spittle meshing with his words as he hissed, "I don't know what the hell that was about, Mike, but you could have cost us a life with your false call back there, and the next time you try something like this, I'm gonna take yours." "But I saw something," I insisted. "Now I don't believe in ghosts, Mike." "And we scoured that water. Get out of my sight. You're off waterfront." He left, and word spread around camp what had happened. I could tell many of them detested me, and no one believed what had happened. So I quit the next week and pushed the thought from my mind, though it still found my dreams. Now that was 20 years ago, and today I hold the newspaper, the top article calling back my memories. Murders at Camp Valleyway. 19 skeletons have been discovered in the lake of Camp Valleyway, several aged at over 30 years since time of death, and none younger than 10. Due to renovations, the lake was drained, revealing a collection of bones at the deepest region. Several femurs were found attached to anchors with rope, and after much investigation, the state police discovered the source of the bodies. 10 years ago, before Clarkstown Orphanage was shut down for embezzling state funds, each summer their orphans spent a week at the camp. 19 were thought to be adopted by locals in nearby proximity to the camp. But after reviewing records, police have discovered these adoptions were never documented. All 19 were drowned and disposed of in the lake, at an area too deep for the campers to normally enter, except for one that drifted near the swimming area due to an insecure rope. It is believed that the orphanage collected funds appropriated for these children long after their death. Police encourage anyone with information on the matter to step forward. It was a usual Friday night at first. As I walked up the pathway leading into the woods, I always took that path on my weekend hikes. Most times, my friends tagged along, but this time, I decided to go alone. I think I was angry about something, but I can't remember what. Anyway, the sky darkened as the sun neared the horizon. Going out hiking that late didn't seem too bad of an idea. I took a flashlight with me, and it was warm being in the middle of summer, so I didn't see the need to bring much else. A few other hikers came down the trail, but I didn't see any that were going up. The trail was easy, and I'd just eaten a little before, so I took to a strolling pace as the forest darkened with the lowering sun. The walking did help me calm down from whatever drove me there in the first place. I didn't think about taking anything that protected me from wildlife until the porcupine with bristles up to my waist meandered in front of my path. Now, they're fairly common in the area and mostly harmless if they're left alone. It only stopped me for a minute, and I bet the odds I wouldn't run into any mountain lions or any other wildlife. I shortly got to the massive rocks which the path led to and climbed to the top of one of them. It was a place that my friends and I would go to all the time to pass a few hours away from the world. And the sun crossed the horizon line right after I reached the top. And that was the first time that I felt as if someone watched me. A quick look at the forest floor and the rocks nearby revealed nothing. So I descended before the sky turned from orange-red to purple. And even though I intended to look at the stars, that feeling just made me want to leave and urged me to move. I walked at a faster pace, but even with the flashlight, the path seemed more difficult to navigate in the darkness. The sounds of the emerging night became louder with all the nocturnal animals and insects waking. Owls hooted in the distance, and crickets played their symphony. I tripped over a mound hidden in the shadows, and stopped my fall with both my hands and a foot. My wrist hurt, so I stayed still for a moment to make sure I hadn't broken a bone, but a twig snapped in the bushes and drew my attention away from my pain. The sound caused me to jump after snatching up my light. I didn't care to look before taking off. After running a moment, I looked back to nothing but trees and an animal trail. I laughed at myself, just assuming a deer or some animal had been startled by me. It didn't take me long before I started to notice that the path which I walked on wasn't the path that I needed to be on. None of the landmarks seemed familiar. Now, I knew most of the trails led back to the entrance, but some of them would be 3 or 4 times the length. So I turned around to go back to the rocks. And the feeling of being watched didn't go away, and I started to fret when I came to a split. I wasn't sure which one I'd come from. I shuffled in my pocket and pulled out a coin, then told myself that if it landed on heads, I would go right. If it were tails, I'd go left. When the coin hit the ground, it revealed the head of Abraham Lincoln. And so I went right, hoping that it would take me back. This direction began to take me uphill, but I knew it wasn't right, so I did turn back, trying to remain as calm as possible, still feeling the eyes burning into the back of my head, but I stayed calm. The split came again. This time I took the opposite direction. I could remember that the pain from my wrists began to draw my attention from the woods. I also tried to explain to myself that it was either an animal watching me as I walked by, or just my mind playing tricks on me since it was dark. I reached the part of the path which caused me to trip, and there I saw nor heard nothing, and so I continued. And when I finally reached the rocks, I noticed something protruding in the sky. A pair of deer antlers stuck up from the top of one of the rock piles. I thought it was strange because the rock would be too far and too hard for a deer to climb or even jump. At first, I wanted to climb up and see it, but as I approached the rock, a pungent odor attacked my nostrils. And so, I thoughtfully chose the right path that time and proceeded to exit. And walking on the right path just didn't feel right. I felt watched again, and I listened for any strange noises. Something darted behind me across the path and into the bushes, but I didn't get a glimpse of it, only the rotting smell I came across by the rocks. I chose not to run but tried to move at a faster pace,
My leg and wrists hurt from the fall and began to swell, making it harder, but I didn't want to see what sort of animal that smell belonged to. I wasn't sure if it was following me, but I didn't turn back to look. The smell didn't seem to go away, but it became fainter, and I figured I would be able to get to the exit before the animal caught back up to me. And I froze in my own footsteps when I walked upon a deer carcass. It sat directly in the middle of the path and appeared to have a cut throat. And then suddenly, a movement in the bushes caused me to turn, and I was met with a pair of yellow eyes peering at me. It startled me as it moved toward me with a sudden jerk, so I ran off into the forest, leaving the path behind and jumping over fallen logs and plants. And the deeper into the woods I ran, the stronger the putrid smell grew. I only stopped to try and get my directions straight when a ruffling noise from the trees forced me to run some more, mindlessly into the woods, and before I realized it, I was lost again. In the very forest I hiked every week. I tried to think of what the yellow-eyed beast could be, and mountain lions seemed to be the only answer, but I don't believe that they're smart enough to set up a dead deer trap as I saw on the trail. The deer would explain the smell, but it filled a large portion of the forest, which seemed odd, unless the creature had several of them killed. I don't even know, do animals even go on murdering sprees? And rustling on both sides of me caused me to panic. But before I ran, I tried to shine my light on some of the moving bushes to see a small, human-like hand reach towards me. I didn't wait around much longer to see what the hand was attached to, and as I ran, my flashlight slipped from my hand. When it hit the ground, the light clicked off and it rolled into the foliage. It was nowhere to be found, and I could hear slight footsteps drawing near me. I left the flashlight and carried on, but not having a light source slowed me down as I searched for a path. I cursed at myself for deciding to leave my phone in the car. And then, I cursed at myself again as I stumbled over plants and sticks. Not knowing where I was running, I ran into a patch of thorny bushes, and it slowed me down drastically, and I cried out in pain when I felt something bite into the palm of my hand. When I looked to see the culprit, it had already disappeared into the thorn bush. When I looked at my hand, I tried not to get lightheaded, because blood was covering my hand and wrist. The thing I thought was odd about the bite is that it looked like pictures of shark bites, like a cookie cutter pierced into my palm. The overwhelming smell and movement in the thorn bush brought me back to my senses, and I stumbled through the bush trying to ignore the piercing thorns going through my shoes and legs. And I began thinking of stupid stuff, like the headlines that would be used in the newspapers when they found my body eaten by a small forest animal. And all my friends would make a joke out of my death and then continue to hike the woods without me. And I kicked through the bush a few times hoping to hit the little monster, but never made contact with anything but snagging vines, which tore at my skin and clothes. And once I got out of the thorny bush, I ran into the clearest sections between the trees. And a familiar sight filled my vision as I ran across the climbing rocks once more. I'm pretty sure that's when I started to get a little angry. I was too smart to let an animal outsmart me, so I grabbed the nearest stick that would break easily and climbed up to the top of my favorite rock. Even if it was a mountain lion, I figured if I kept to the high ground, I could defend myself until it left me alone. And if I had to, I would have waited there all night until the morning hikers arrived. Like a ninja holding a sword ready to strike, I waited on that rock. And nothing but the rotting smell met me at the top. I could still hear movement when I leaned over. I could see a shadow darting into the bushes. I shouted at it and tried to make a bunch of noise. I even threw fist-sized rocks at the trees and into the bushes. But only for a moment did it seem gone. At this point, my death seemed inevitable, and I got chills when the clouds blocked out the little remaining light. And I swear, I heard a chuckle come from the forest floor. Maybe I was having some sort of mental breakdown. I mean, I've had tests and they say I'm fine. I just didn't want to be there anymore. I shouted a few more times, then called out for help, hoping there would be some nighttime hikers nearby. Maybe some people smoking or drinking in the woods. Nobody called back in return, though. I traced out my path with a mental line, and then I jumped off the rock, trying not to hurt myself any further. I pushed through the pain in my leg and had momentarily forgotten about the bleeding bite mark, and sprinted, hoping my subconscious would avoid the things I could see in the darkness. The outline of the deer's body came up, and I jumped over it. And there was a second corpse on the ground, and this one didn't appear to be the outline of an animal, but a human body. My gut sank as I jumped over it and continued running. I knew I should have gone back to make sure, but it just seemed like a trap. As I ran, something ran along with me, not in the path, but off the trail and just behind me. And the exit of the hiking trail neared, and the pursuing sounded louder, and I bolted for my car while fiddling to take the car keys from my pocket. Then I pushed the button and unlocked the door. When my car lights flashed from unlocking, the chasing sound stopped. It only took a second for me to get in my car and lock the doors. And there was a screwdriver in my glove compartment which I grabbed immediately, and then I caught my breath as I started the car. When I looked back to the forest, I noticed yellow eyes glistening with the returning moonlight. There were multiple of them. 6 or 7 pairs of eyes stared at me from the protection of the trees, which I watched for a moment. And they watched me. But when I raised my phone from its holder to take a picture or video, they vanished. I was lucky that I didn't get a speeding ticket that night because I'd never driven home so fast in my life. And the next day I told a few of my friends about it, and they convinced me to hike up with them to check it out. They said if there really was a body up there, then the police should know about it. I took a pocket knife and my grandfather's handgun just in case. But we couldn't find anything. There were no bodies, no blood trails, no yellow-eyed creature, and certainly no rancid smell. My friends still tease me about it, but I haven't gone hiking up there since. I haven't really gone hiking anywhere since. Though my friends say that the mark on my hand looked rather strange, they agreed with the doctor when he told me it was probably caused by the thorn bush when I was walking through it. I posted pictures of my palm and nobody could figure out what type of bite mark it was. So that's what happened to me when I went hiking alone. I couldn't find anything related to my story floating around the internet, so maybe someone can respond and tell me if this has happened before, or if I was just losing my mind in the middle of the woods at night.